classic chestnut of high resolution, 4K, 8K, and God knows what else. Walking through ISE, there are two things that stuck out. Laser projection, which is, everybody was laser projecting, fantastic, but amazing screens. And we were talking, I mean, apart from the distribution side of all this, we're thinking really, what are they about? 4K, it could do fantastic resolution, but what are we using it for? And how should we plan for it? And what problems are we going to get by installing all this stuff in our companies? It's expensive. Do we need it? Are we going to hit the home televisions first with this stuff? Or are we going to use these big LED screens in business? Are we now into OLED, really, which is infinitely more impressive, I think, in terms of all kinds of things. But what sort of problems are we going to be having associated with 4 and 8K? I mean, we well away from all this? And what problems do you come across?
The problems, I think, is
with screens generally.
People's expectations. I mean, obviously, it's all driven from the domestic environment. It's unusual because a lot of the time, you tend to get a commercial product which then finds its way into the domestic market. I think this time around, the whole 4K thing has come the other way. And people have had, as I was saying earlier, 4K screens have been around for a few years now, but the sources haven't been there. There now are 4K cameras. You walk around the show, there's lots of 4K cameras. But then you start to move into the next step of that. So it's HDCP now. Traditionally, with standard HD, HDCP was version 1.2. Sorry.
2.2.
So that's the new version.
Oh, it's the new version.
So that was the old version. Now everything that's 4K, it's going to be broadcast, is HDCP 2.2. Now, some of these original screens, the 4K screens that were launched, weren't 2.2 compatible. So when you get your brand new Sony player, 4K Sony player, or brand new 4K Blu-ray player, you're going to plug that into a 4K screen, which isn't 2.2 compliant, and it's not going to play. So straight away you've got an issue. And now the normal layman on the street isn't going to understand what's going on here. They're going to plug it in and think, well, what's going on? The TV's broken, or the player is. And therein lies the rub, because that's where you start to find these issues. And as I say, people on the street don't understand the elements of what they're supposed to look out for. So I think that the point is if you're looking at buying a new TV, and if you're in the market to nip down to your local electrical store and buy a brand new screen, you need to find out, obviously, if it's a 4K screen, if it's HDCP 2.2 compliant. That information isn't always readily available, so it's not something which will be a badge on the front. Some manufacturers do that, but you may need to go into the specification and actually try and find it within the spec. And the second thing as well is make sure it's HDMI 2 as well, which is the next level of HDMI. Now the connect is exactly the same, but it's in terms of the data that it actually can take. So making sure that the 4K information that comes through can be passed through that port. So again, if you're looking at a source, this is where we start to get sort of look at numbers and technical.
Yeah, not too technical.
If you've got
technical enough anyway. So.
If you've got a 4K source which is coming in a full color spacing, so 4:4 color spacing at 50 or 60 hertz, so frame rate, refresh rate, you're going to need an HDMI 2 connector on that. That's the only thing that can pass that data coming through 18 gigs worth of data a second. HDMI 1 can cope with 4K. At a reduced colour spacing, so basically at a 420 colour spacing, so there's less data coming through, which brings that down then to 10 gigs. So again, it can pass that through. So these are just things you need to be looking out for. Again, from a consumer's point of view, it's an absolute nightmare, because how on earth would you expect to know all of this? And there is going to be a certain amount of trial and error. But I think as screens are being launched now, certainly in the last 18 months, most of these screens do have these on board. So you should be safe. But in the commercial world, people have bought these screens a couple of years ago, and they're starting now to get the 4K source. So they've got the new Sony player, or they've got the new camera, or whatever, and finding it's not working. And that's when, as an AV professional, you may be scratching your head thinking, well, what's going on here? So these are all factors you've got to take on board.
I mean, what I saw at IC was a stream TV service, a stream TV network, I think it is. And it's like everything else, when a new technology comes along, it's a killer application that sells it. And it was a stereoscopic, it was the old Philips research team in Eindhoven, who were taken over by Bosch, and they put together a rendering engine and a clever algorithm that produced a stereoscopic image that was played back on a 4K TV, which was wonderful. But once that hits televisions, and in probably under a year's time, I'm guessing, those 4K TVs will fly at the shop.
I think,
regardless of what connector we've got, this, something else, but they will be already on the television. You'll just go with what you need to buy, don't you?
That's right. Well, screen size originally has been the driving force for 4K, because as you get bigger screens, much bigger, it's like a photo. If you take a picture on your camera phone and then you blow it up to be the size of this whole of this wall, you're going to see the pixelization. So as you get bigger screens, you need more pixels to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And again, in sport as well, that's where 4K is really being driven. So I think all of the Champions League games now are being broadcast in 4K. Obviously, the Olympics, they're talking 8K. Which we don't want to go down that route just yet.
No,
let's leave the 8K.
For 2020, NHK have said they're broadcasting in 8K.
Yeah,
that's right.
They did experiments at the basketball arena in London.
Yeah,
that's
NHK
right.
and BBC,
8K.
wasn't it? They haven't released any of that yet, but they were due for 2012 Olympics, which I thought was...
Yeah.
I was wondering when that would happen. Then it's 2020, is it? They're going to...
They've said they'll broadcast it in 8K in 2020.
We'd have a lot of headaches watching that stuff, aren't we? Just imagine a brain processing that amount. The problem is, the more complex the image, the more the brain has to process. So it's very difficult to get these things right in certainly a domestic medium. You know, I think you have to rethink the environment you're putting it into, personally.
You do.
You need quite big screens in a dramatic setting in business and corporate. And probably that's where we're seeing everybody's filming in 4K, but not... You know, how are they showing it off? So apart from the distribution element of it.
And it's the delivery to the home as well. I mean, if you live in a rural area like I do until recently, I was getting sort of, 1.5 meg broadband, which is not enough to get streamed content to my home. But if you're sort of around the sort of 15 meg mark, then that's the point at which 4K content should make it through to where you are. So again, if we're talking 8K, the bandwidth's going to go much higher, and it's just not feasible. So I think once the infrastructure is right, it's like doing a very good commercial installation. Get the infrastructure correct, and then you can have the best that's on offer from the AV market. If the infrastructure's not quite there, then you're at the limits of what you've got to deal with.
What does the end user want though? Do they want 4K or not?
$64,000 question, isn't it, really?
Certainly. And again, business applications. Do they want 4K to deliver their PowerPoint screen with 27 bullet points on there?
Yeah.
Probably not. They don't need that. So from a business application, we don't see 4K driving too many new products for us. We see consumers requesting 4K because that's what we're conditioning them to ask for, I think, is probably what I'd say. But we need to look at what they're doing, what the application is. If maybe it's a digital signage application which is delivering some very high quality content over multiple screens, then possibly 4K screens would be the answer. But it goes back to the same question. What is the application? What do we want the user to experience? Sure. How is it going to be distributed? It kind of summarises all the questions we've been talking about. Really, start with that application, then we'll see how we're going to deliver it and what the endpoints are for which we're going to deliver it onto. So, yeah, I see it kind of bringing it all together.